The great hall of Ashcombe Court held 400 candles that evening, and every one of them had been lit by a hand that was not hers, which was the first thing Clara noticed as the doors opened and the room turned to look at her. She stood at the top of the stairs in ivory silk. Below her, the assembled county of Wiltshire performed the deep and practiced obeisance owed to a duchess on the night of her presentation. Fans lowered, heads inclined. The Marchioness of Denhurst, who had not risen from her chair for a bishop, rose now, and sank into a curtsy so precise it might have been measured with a rule. Clara looked at the floor. It was black and white marble laid in a diamond pattern, and there was a hairline crack running through the 7th stone from the left of the 2nd column. And she knew that crack, the way a person knows the scar on her own knuckle. She had knelt on it. She had put her weight on it, in the January of 2 years past, with a brush in her raw hand and lye water going cold in a bucket beside her. And she had learned that the crack caught the bristles if you dragged across it rather than along it. 400 candles. 200 guests. Not one of them knew. At the foot of the stairs, in the black coat and white gloves of his office, stood Mr. Pemberton. And Mr. Pemberton had been butler at Ashcombe Court for 31 years. His face gave nothing. His eyes did not lift to hers. When she reached the last step, he bowed exactly as low as he bowed to every duchess who had ever crossed that floor. No lower and no higher. And he said, "Your Grace," in a voice that had announced 3 generations of this family into this room. He had also once handed her a rag and told her the housekeeper would not tolerate streaking. What she did not yet know was that of all the people in that hall, Mr. Combray, Pemberton was the only one holding the whole of her in his hands, and that he had been deciding, for 11 weeks, what to do with it. The Duke of Ashcombe was watching her from beside the fireplace. He had not moved. He had not smiled. Julian had a way of standing that made the room arrange itself around him without his asking, and he stood that way now, one hand at his side, his face as still as ice over a river. She had married him 9 days ago in a parish church with 4 witnesses. If you have ever walked into a room where every person in it believed something about you that was not true, stay with this one. She did not know yet what she was walking toward. You might. Clara Vance had come to Ashcombe Court on the 14th of December, 2 years and 1 month before that evening, with a bundle under her arm and 8 shillings in her shoe. Her father had been a schoolmaster in Devizes, and he had taught her Latin because he had no son to teach it to, and he had died in the autumn of a cough that had started in September and finished him by the 2nd week of November. He had left her a lease with 3 months remaining, a shelf of books, a small tin box, and nothing else. The books went first. The lease expired. The tin box she kept. She had gone into service because a woman of 23, with Latin and no dowry, has exactly 1 door and it opens downward. Mrs. Harkness, the housekeeper, had looked at her hands that first morning and been unimpressed by them. Soft hands, she had said. They will not be soft long. She had been correct. By February, the skin across Clara's knuckles had split and healed, and split again. And she had learned the particular arithmetic of a great house. The black and white hall took 2 hours if you were quick, and 3 if you were careful. That the lye ate the skin between your fingers before it touched anywhere else. That you scrubbed the corridors at 4 in the morning so that no one who lived in the house would ever have to see it being done. That was the whole of the arrangement. The floors were cleaned, and no one had cleaned them. The fires were lit, and no one had lit them. Ashcombe Court ran on the labor of 11 women who were required to be invisible for 16 hours a day, and Clara had been the newest of them, and the newest scrubbed the halls. To Mrs. Harkness, she was the schoolmaster's girl. It was not said cruelly. It was said the way one names a tool. The schoolmaster's girl can do the hall, Mrs. Sir, Harkness said, in the servants' passage, on a morning when the frost had made lace of the window. And the words settled on Clara's shoulders like the cold and stayed there. She had knelt on that marble 211 mornings. Pemberton had watched her do it. He had not helped, because a butler does not help, and he had not spoken beyond the necessary, because a butler does not speak beyond the necessary. What he had done in the third week of her service was to set a folded square of sacking beside her bucket without comment and walk on. She had knelt on that sacking every morning for 7 months and had never once thanked him for it, because they both understood that thanking him would have made it a kindness, and a kindness would have made it visible, and visible things at Ashcombe Court had a way of being taken away. There were other things he did not do. He did not tell Mrs. Harkness that the schoolmaster's girl had been reading in the coal store by candle end at 11 at night. He did not remark, in the winter of her first year, that the hall was being finished half an hour faster than it had been finished by anyone before her, though he knew it, because he stood at the doors with a watch in his waistcoat and 30 years of knowing exactly how long a floor takes. He did not mention the morning she was sick in the scullery, and did the hall anyway, and did it properly. He opened the door for her at 4, and he shut it behind her at 6. And he said good morning, and he said nothing else. And Clara had understood that to be the shape of the man and had not looked for anything under it. She thought about him rarely. He was a fixture of the house, like the newel post, like the crack in the 7th stone. That was the great error of her 2 years at Ashcombe Court, and she would not learn it was an error until a September evening with 200 people watching. It was on the 212th morning that the Duke came down the stairs at 4:30. He was not supposed to be there. Clara heard the boot on the 3rd step and did not have time to gather her bucket, and so she did the only thing left to her, which was to press herself flat against the wall of the corridor with her head down and her wet hands hidden in her apron, and to wait to be walked past. He did not walk past. He stopped. She could see the toes of his boots on the wet marble, and she could see the water darkening around them, and she thought, absurdly, that she would have to do that section again. The silence went on long enough that she heard her own heart in her throat. "You will ruin your knees," he said. That was all. His voice was low and level and carried no warmth she could locate. She said, "Yes, Your Grace," to the boots, because she did not have permission to say it to the face. The boots did not move for another 3 seconds. She counted them. She had learned in that house to count silences the way a sailor counts between the flash and the thunder, because the length of a silence told you what was coming and how far off it was. 3 seconds was not a reprimand. 3 seconds was not anything she had a name for. Then he went on into the library and shut the door. Clara knelt back down and put the brush into the water, and found that her hands were not steady, and she attributed that to the cold, which had been at her since 3:30 and was in the marble and in the bucket and in the bones of both her wrists. She finished the hall. She did the section by the library door twice, because his boots had been on it, and she told herself that this was thoroughness. She told herself that he had been annoyed at the wet floor because that was the reading her life had trained her to take, and because the other reading was not available to a woman with £8 a year and split knuckles and a name nobody in that county had ever needed to learn. She was wrong. It would take her a very long time to learn how wrong. The Duke of Ashcombe was 34 years old and had held the title for 4 years. The county knew 3 facts about him. He had money, he had no wife, and he did not dance. From these 3 facts the county had assembled a man, and the man it had assembled was cold, and every mother with a daughter in Wiltshire had been throwing herself against that coldness for 4 seasons without effect. They did not know about the room at the end of the east corridor. Clara did, 'cause Clara cleaned it. It was a bedroom, and it was kept, and no one slept in it. There was a hairbrush on the dressing table with pale hair still caught in the bristles. There was a book, face down on the coverlet, held open at page 140, and the page had not turned in 4 years. Mrs. Harkness's instruction was exact. Dust it, move nothing. And if you shift the book by so much as the width of a thumb, you will be out of this house by noon. Clara dusted around the book. She never touched it. She wondered about it every single morning for 2 years. And the wondering was the closest thing to company she had. The first ball of the following season was held at Ashcombe Court on the 2nd of May, and it was that night that Clara did the thing that changed everything, though she did not know she was doing it, and no one saw her do it. except the one man whose seeing mattered. There was a boy in the kitchen called Tom Rudd. He was 11. He carried coal, and he had dropped a Severus dish in the passage outside the dining room at 9:30 with 200 guests 50 feet away. Clara heard it from the scullery. She came out and found him white and shaking with the shards around his boots, and Mrs. Harkness already coming down the passage with her keys ringing. The dish was worth more than that boy would earn in 6 years. He would be dismissed without a character. At 11, without a character in that county. There was one road, and it went to the workhouse, and it did not come back. Clara knelt and put her hands among the pieces. "I knocked it from the shelf," she said when Mrs. Harkness arrived. She had not. Everyone in the passage knew she had not. The boy knew it, and his mouth opened. And Clara looked at him once, and it closed. Mrs. Harkness looked at the shards, and at Clara's hands, and at the boy, and Mrs. Molly. Harkness was not a stupid woman, and she made the calculation that a housekeeper makes. One of these two is worth keeping, and the other is a scrub maid, and the accounts must balance somewhere. "Your wages," Mrs. Harkness said, "until it is paid, and you will not be in the front of this house again. £9. 2 years of wages. Clara had 8 shillings, put by in a tin box that had been her father's. She had been putting them by for 19 months, against a plan she had never spoken aloud to anyone, which was a room in Devizes and a slate and 6 children at 4 a week, which was the only future she had ever permitted herself to hold, and which required £11 and a character. The floor was cold through her stockings, the music came through the wall from the great hall a quadrille, and it was very loud and very far away at the same time. "Yes, Mrs. Harkness," she said. She gathered the pieces into her apron. There were 9 of them large enough to lift, and a quantity of smaller ones she took up with her palm flat against the boards, sweeping them together, which was how her hands came to be bleeding by the time she was done. The boy stood against the wall with his cap in both fists, and did not move, and did not speak, and Mrs. Harkness took her keys and went back up the passage, and the quadrille ended, and another began. Clara did not look up. That was the whole point of the arrangement. She had been in that house 19 months, and had made not one single error, and the not looking up was the discipline that had kept her in it, and she held to it now, with the pieces of a French dish in her apron, and 19 months of shillings gone. "Miss," the boy said. "Go to bed," she said. "You were in the coal store all evening." He went. She did not know that the Duke of Ashcombe was standing in the doorway at the end of the passage 12 feet behind her, where he had come to escape his own ball for 90 seconds. He had watched the whole of it. He had watched her kneel. He had watched her lie. He had watched her hand £9 in 2 years to a boy who would never be able to repay a penny of it, and who she had barely spoken to in her life, and he had watched her do it in the dark of a service passage, where she believed with total certainty that no one was looking. He said nothing. He went back to his ball. He did not dance. 11 weeks later he came into the servants' hall at 8 in the morning, which had not happened in living memory, and he asked Mrs. Harkness for the schoolmaster's girl by name. He offered her marriage in the library, with the door standing open, and Mr. Say. Pemberton in the corridor within earshot, because he understood exactly what was owed to her reputation, even then, and the offer he made was not romantic in the smallest particular. "My mother's cousin has filed to have the Ashcombe entail redirected," he said, "on the grounds that I am unmarried and unlikely to remain. Otherwise, he has a solicitor and a hearing in September. If I am married before the hearing, the claim collapses. You would have the title, the jointure, and this house. I am not asking for affection, and I would not accept a pretense of it." Clara stood in her apron in a library she had dusted 400 times, and looked at a man who was offering to make her a duchess for reasons entirely of his own convenience.
"Why me?"
she said. His jaw moved. "Because you will not be cruel with it. That was the whole of it. Level, plain, no warmth she could locate." She read it as she had read the boots on the wet marble. He needed a wife, and she was the wife who cost him nothing And any woman of sense would take 9,000 a year and a title and be grateful. And she was a woman of sense, and she took it. She did not permit herself to notice that her hands had gone unsteady, and that she had put one of them flat on the desk to stop it. Her mouth said, "Very well, Your Grace." Her hands said something else. Entirely. They were married on the 9th of June in the parish church at Ashcombe with 4 witnesses. One of the 4 was Mr. Pemberton, who had been asked by the Duke and who had said yes before the question was finished. Which brings us back to the 400 candles. The county came because a duke's wife must be presented, and it came in a state of appetite that had nothing to do with hospitality. Where had she come from? Nobody had heard of her. Vance, was it? A schoolmaster's daughter from Devizes, and no fortune, and no connection. And married in a parish church in June with 4 witnesses and no announcement in the papers until it was done. They bowed. They bowed beautifully. They bowed, and then they went to the terrace doors and asked each other where she had come from. Lady Denhurst asked it loudest, and Lady Denhurst was the Duke's mother's cousin's wife, and her husband was Mr. Potter. Edmund Crail, and that gentleman had a solicitor and a hearing that had been dismissed in September, and Lady Denhurst had not forgiven anyone in that house for it. One does wonder, Lady Denhurst said to the Marchioness on the terrace with a glass in her hand, and Clara 8 feet away with her back turned. What one is bowing to. Precisely. A schoolmaster's girl in a duchess's pearls. The schoolmaster's girl. Clara did not turn. She had heard those 3 words in a frost-laced passage from a woman with keys at her belt, and now she heard them on a terrace from a woman with diamonds at her throat, and the words had not changed at all. Only the light on them had changed. Her breath went shallow. Her face stayed exactly as it had been. She had 2 years of practice at being a wall. Beside the fireplace, Julian set down his glass. He crossed the room. He did not hurry. He arrived at his wife's shoulder and stood there, and he said nothing whatever. And Lady Denhurst's sentence stopped in the middle and did not resume. He offered Clara his arm. She took it. He walked her the length of the terrace, at a pace that was almost insultingly unhurried, and did not speak until they had reached the balustrade. "Eat something," he said. "You have been standing 4 hours." She read it as management. He was protecting the marriage, and the marriage was a legal instrument, and a legal instrument must not appear to be cracking on its first public outing. That was the reading her life had trained her to take. Her body read it otherwise. Her body had known exactly where he was in that room for 4 hours without once looking at him. The trouble with a great house is that the people who clean it know it, and the people who own it do not. The Duchess of Ashcombe knew that the 3rd stair from the landing spoke if you put your weight on the left of it. She knew that the servants' passage behind the dining room carried voices from the terrace with perfect fidelity if the 4th window was open, because she had spent 2 years listening to the county through that window while she scrubbed. She knew which of the 11 maids had a mother in Trowbridge, and which had a brother in the Navy. She knew that the coal boy, now 12, was still carrying coal, and that he had learned to read from a horn book she had left in the coal store and never mentioned. She could not stop knowing it. She woke at 4 for the first 3 weeks and lay rigid in a bed, with silk hangings listening to the house begin below her. And she knew every sound of it, and she could not tell a soul. She began to make small corrections. She had the lye changed. For soft soap, she had the hall done at 6 instead of 4, which shifted nothing about the difficulty, and everything about the cold. She had a stove put in the scullery. Mrs. Harkness received each instruction with a face of perfect professional blankness, and executed it exactly. She had not spoken to Clara alone since the wedding. Neither of them had said the word that both of them were holding. Mr. Dim? Pemberton said nothing at all. He was in every room. He was at every door. He handed her into carriages and announced her into drawing rooms, and stood behind her chair at dinners of 30. And 31 years of Ashcombe Court stood in him like rings in a tree, and Clara could not read one line of his face. He had known her on her knees. He had given her the sacking. He had witnessed her marriage. He served her now with an exactness so complete that it began in the 4th week to frighten her. Because a butler who has served 3 generations of a family does not serve a scrub maid in pearls. He serves the house. And Clara did not know, she genuinely did not know, whether Mr. Tad. Pemberton had decided she was the house or the thing that had got into it. She asked him once. It was the 2nd week of July, in the corridor outside the morning room, and she had woken at 4 again, and had not slept. And she was not entirely governing herself. "Mr. Pemberton," she said, "you know what I was." He set down the tray. He looked at her for the first time since the 9th of June. "I know what you are, Your Grace," he said. She waited. She had spent 2 years learning to read that face from below, and she could not read it from beside. "Mr. Dorr." "Pemberton, that is not an answer." "No, Your Grace," he agreed. He picked up the tray. At the turn of the corridor he stopped, which he had never done in her presence in 2 years and 2 months, and he said, without turning around, "The sacking is still in the linen press, if it is of interest. I have not had occasion to give it to anyone else." Then he went on down the corridor, and Clara stood in the passage of her own house, with her heart going hard and no idea in the world what he had meant. And she went up to her room and sat on the edge of a bed with silk hangings, and put her face in her scarred hands, and could not have said, if she had been asked, whether what she felt was fear or something with a great deal more warmth in it, that she had no permission to name. It was the 3rd week of July, when the book turned. She had gone into the east room because she could not sleep, and because she had dusted it for 2 years, and her feet still took her there. The candle was in her hand, and she saw that the book on the coverlet was open at page 141. Behind her, in the doorway, the Duke of Ashcombe said her name was Eleanor Clara, did not turn around. "She was my sister," he said. "She was 19. She had a fever in the March of the year I inherited, and I was in London for 11 days settling the title. And they wrote to me on the 4th day, and I did not come until the 9th, because there was a matter of a signature. And I judged that it would keep." She was reading that book to the end. She did not reach it. The candle guttered. Clara held it very still. "I have turned that page once a year," he said. "It is the only thing I do about it." Then, level plain, no warmth anywhere on the surface of it, he spoke again. "You knelt in a passage and gave a boy £9 you did not have, because you judged that he would not keep. I was standing behind you. I have thought about it every day since." He did not touch her. He did not come into the room. He said, "Good night, Clara." And that was the first time in her life that he had used her name, and it went through her like the cold of a January floor. And she stood in the dark of a dead girl's bedroom with her hand on a chairback, and could not have said one word if the house had been burning. That is the thing about being seen. It does not arrive gently. It arrives like weather. There is a moment in every one of these stories where the listener knows the truth, and the woman does not. And this was that moment, and if it has ever happened to you, stay with her a little longer. She was 3 weeks from finding out. Lady Denhurst had a schedule, and it required a room. The room was the Great Hall. The occasion was the Harvest Ball on the 11th of September, and the audience was the same 200 people who had bowed on the night of the presentation. Her husband had lost his claim on the entail because the Duke had married, and there was one circumstance in English law that would put it back in his hand, and that circumstance was fraud in the marriage itself. She had spent the summer collecting. She had found a woman in Trowbridge who had left Ashcombe's service in the spring, and she had paid her. And the woman had a name, and a date, and a room in the attic. She had found a laundry account. She had found, because such things are always findable when a woman with money is looking, a page of the household book and Mrs. Butler. Harkness's own hand dated the 14th of December 2 years past, entering one Miss Vance at £8 per annum. As under housemaid she waited until the room was full. She waited until Clara had come down the stairs. She had learned the shape of the thing from the presentation. and she meant to use the same staircase and the same candles and the same 200 bowing heads. And she meant them to see what they had been bowing to. Clara was standing beside the fireplace. Julian was 15 feet away, held by the Marchioness. Mr. Pemberton was at the doors. Lady Denhurst crossed the floor with a page in her hand, and her voice pitched exactly to carry to the terrace doors and no further, which is a thing an accomplished woman can do. "Your Grace," she said, "I wonder if you would settle a question. There is an entry in this house's own book. December the 14th. A Miss Vance. Under housemaid, £8. There is a woman in Trowbridge who shared an attic with her for a year and a half. There is a laundry account with her name on it. I have wondered all summer what we were bowing to." The room stopped. "A schoolmaster's girl," Lady Denhurst said, "on her knees in this hall, scrubbing this floor. 200 mornings, and every one of you bowed to her. 200 faces turned. Clara stood in ivory silk on black and white marble, 7 feet from the 7th stone from the left of the 2nd column, and every word of it was true, and there was nothing in the world she could say. She looked for Julian. He was 15 feet away, and he had gone completely still, and his face gave her nothing, and in the 2 seconds it took her to read it, she read it exactly as her life had trained her to read it. He was a duke, and this was a hall, and 200 people had just been told that his wife had scrubbed the floor they were standing on, and there was no version of a man in that position that ended anywhere but where the county was already going. Her wound said, "This is what it was always for." He needed a wife by September. It is September. She has handed him the grounds and the room, and he will take them, because that is what men in his position do, and you have known since the day you were born that no one chooses you freely. The Marchioness's fan came up. Somewhere near the terrace doors, someone laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was worse than a cruel laugh. It was the small, startled sound a person makes when a thing they have been standing on turns out to be a trapdoor, and it ran along the terrace and stopped, and after it, the hall was so quiet that Clara could hear the candles. 400 of them. She had not lit one. A woman near the orchestra said quite clearly, "Good heavens," and put her glass down on a table without looking at where she was putting it, and the glass went over, and nobody picked it up. Clara felt her knees go. She put her hand out, and found the mantel, and locked her arm and stayed standing, because 2 years of that floor had taught her one thing, and the thing it had taught her was how not to fall down in front of people. She said, into the silence, in a voice that did not shake, "It is true. I scrubbed this floor. I was paid £8 a year to do it, and I did it well." And that was the sentence. She could not have said in June, and she said it, and the room did not know what to do with it. Lady Denhurst turned to the Duke. She had the page in her hand, and she was smiling, and she said, "Your Grace, surely you did not know?" Julian crossed the room. He did not hurry. He crossed the black and white marble in 5 unhurried strides, and he did not stop beside his wife. He stopped in front of her, half a pace, facing the room, and the crowd's faces followed him, the way iron follows a magnet. He put out his hand. Clara looked at it. She took it. He said, "I watched her scrub it. I married her for it. 7 words and then 4. Level, plain, no warmth on the surface, and it landed in that hall like a stone dropped down a well." Nobody moved. Lady Denhurst's mouth opened. It closed. She said, "Your Grace, the entry is in the book. It is in the household book. It is in Mrs. Harkness's own hand. I have the page." She had said the same sentence 3 times, and she heard herself do it on the 3rd. And then Mr. Pemberton came down off the doors. He crossed the hall in the black coat and white gloves of his office. He had served 3 generations of that family on that floor. He stopped 4 feet from Lady Denhurst, and he bowed to her correctly, at the exact depth her rank required. And then he turned and faced the room, and the room gave him its attention because 31 years buys a man that. "Peer, the entry is correct," he said. "I have the household book from the year 1812 in my pantry, and I will fetch it if the company wishes." She entered this house on the 14th of December as under housemaid at £8. She scrubbed the hall you are standing in for 211 mornings. I know the count because I opened the door for her every one of them. He paused. Nobody breathed. In May of last year, Mr. Cummery. Pemberton said, a coal boy of 11, broke a dish in the passage behind you. Her Grace took it upon herself. It cost her £9, and 2 years of wages and her place in the front of this house, and she never spoke of it, and the boy is in the stable yard tonight and can read, which he could not do then. I was in the passage. His Grace was in the doorway. Neither of us was seen. He looked at Lady Denhurst. His face was as it had always been. Your ladyship has spent a summer establishing that her Grace has washed this floor. I've spent 31 years in this house. In that time I have bowed to 4 duchesses. I have not, until this year, been proud of it. Lady Denhurst stood on the black and white marble with a page in her hand. The Marchioness of Denhurst, who had not risen for a bishop, looked at the paper in her cousin's hand, and then looked away from it, and lowered her fan. That was all she did. It was enough. It went through that room in 4 seconds the way a change in weather goes through a wheat field, and Lady Denhurst felt it go, and she understood with the specific clarity of a woman whose script has worked everywhere except here, that she had brought a page into a room that had just decided to be ashamed of her. She did not weep, and she was not destroyed. She folded the page, she said, I see. And she went out by the terrace doors, and Edmund Crail followed her, and neither of them came to Ashcombe Court again. Clara stood with her hand in her husband's hand. The orchestra had stopped. Nobody had told it to start. Julian turned to her, and he was not looking at the room any more, and for the first time in the whole of their acquaintance, she watched his face come apart. Not much, not more than 1/4 of an inch. The jaw giving, and the eyes going, and the whole carbstone architecture of him failing all at once in front of 200 people who had never seen it happen. I have wanted, he said, and stopped. Her hand was still in his. His thumb had moved across her knuckles, across the split places, the ones that had healed white, and never gone away. I have wanted you since a passage in May, he said, and I have been afraid every day since June that you married me because you had nowhere else to be. Clara Vance, Duchess of Ashcombe, who had knelt on that floor 211 times, looked up at her husband. I have known where you were in every room I have entered since the 9th of June, she said. I have never once had to look. He lifted her hand. He did not kiss it immediately. He held it near his mouth and stopped there, and the pause was long enough that she felt his breath on the scarred place. And neither of them moved, because both of them understood that what came next could not be taken back. Then he kissed it, and the room, which had been holding still for the better part of a minute, let out its breath all at once. The orchestra started. Nobody had told it to. They danced. The Duke of Ashcombe, who did not dance, danced with his wife on a black and white marble floor with a hairline crack in the 7th stone from the left of the 2nd column. And 200 people watched him do it, and understood that they had been shown something and would be talking about it for 20 years. That was the 11th of September. The first snow came on the 2nd of December, and it came in the afternoon, and by 4 o'clock the park had gone quiet under it. Clara was in the East Room. It was hers now, in the way that rooms become yours when you stop dusting around a thing and start sitting with it. The fire was lit. The hairbrush was still on the dressing table, because she had asked and he had said, leave it, and the book was still on the coverlet. She had read it aloud to him through November, from page 141 onward, 3 or 4 pages an evening, while the light went and the fire took over. That afternoon she read the last 4 pages. Julian sat in the chair by the fire and did not say anything and did not move, and when she came to the end of the book, she closed it and held it in her lap, and the room was very quiet, and the snow was coming down past the window in the last of the light. Thank you, he said. She put the book on the table by the bed. Closed, face up, finished. Downstairs in the great hall, Mr. Grain. Pemberton was putting out the candles, as he had done for 31 years, and the boy, who was 13 now, and no longer carried coal, was going along behind him with the long brass snuffer and getting the high ones wrong. "Mr. Dea," Pemberton showed him twice. The second time he got it. They came to the seventh stone from the left of the second column, and the crack was where it had always been. And Mr. Dister. Pemberton stopped for a moment, as an old man will, and looked at it, and then went on down the row. Upstairs, the snow went on falling. Clara went to the window. The park was white and going blue at the edges. The light was almost gone, and behind her the fire moved, and her husband was in the chair with his eyes closed and his face open. She looked at her hands on the sill. The knuckles were still marked. They would always be marked. 2 years of lye does not undo itself for silk. She had scrubbed that floor 211 times, and one man had opened the door for her every morning, and one man had watched her from a doorway in the dark. And between the two of them they had carried the whole of her through that hall on the 11th of September, without her having to say a word in her own defense that she had not already earned. Outside, the snow kept coming. She stood at the window of the room she had once dusted, in a house whose every floor she knew by the sound of it, and she did not feel like a woman who had been rescued. She felt like a woman who had been recognized. The candle on the sill burned on into the dark, and she lit it. Thank you for staying to the end of it. If Clara's evening on the stairs found you somewhere, sit with it a moment before you go.